So there's this question I want you to sit with for a minute, and I mean really sit with it, not just give the quick obvious answer. When you think about the things you haven't done, the opportunities you've passed up, the dreams you've let sit on the shelf, what are you actually afraid of? Most people will immediately say failure, right? That's the socially acceptable answer, the one that makes sense. Nobody wants to fail, nobody wants to look stupid or lose money or face rejection. But here's what's strange and what most people never stop to examine: for a lot of us, maybe even most of us, the thing we're actually terrified of isn't failure at all. It's success. And we don't even realize it because fear of success sounds absurd. It sounds like something privileged people make up to sound interesting. Why would anyone be afraid of getting exactly what they want? But once you understand what success actually demands and what it threatens, the fear makes perfect sense. Let me paint you a picture of what fear of failure actually looks like, because I think we need to distinguish between these two things clearly. When you're afraid of failure, you don't start. You come up with elaborate plans but never take the first step. You research endlessly but never pull the trigger. You talk about what you're going to do someday but that day never comes. Or you start but you don't really try, you hold something back so that if it doesn't work out you can tell yourself you never gave it your full effort anyway. The fear of failure is about protecting your ego, protecting your self-image from the possibility of being proven inadequate. It's about avoiding the feeling of shame that comes with trying and not succeeding. And yeah, that's a real fear, that drives real behavior, but it's actually pretty straightforward. You don't do the thing because you're afraid it won't work out. Fear of success, though, that's so much sneakier because it operates in the opposite direction. When you're afraid of success, you do start. You might even make significant progress. Things start working out. People notice. Opportunities open up. And right at that moment when you're on the verge of breaking through to the next level, something happens. You sabotage it. You procrastinate on the crucial step. You pick a fight with your business partner. You stop returning emails from potential clients. You decide actually this whole thing doesn't matter to you anymore and you pivot to something completely different. And you have all these logical sounding reasons for why you made these choices, but underneath, what's really happening is that success was getting too close and too real and your brain hit the emergency brake. Here's the thing about success that makes it genuinely threatening in ways that failure isn't. Success changes everything. When you fail, at least your life stays roughly the same. You're disappointed, sure, maybe embarrassed, but you're still in familiar territory. You know how to be the person who hasn't made it yet. You've been that person for years. There's comfort in that identity even if it's painful comfort. But success. Success means entering completely unknown territory. It means becoming someone new. And your brain, especially the ancient survival-oriented parts of your brain, treats unknown territory as inherently dangerous because in our evolutionary past, unknown territory was where the predators lived. Think about what actually happens if you succeed at the thing you say you want. Let's say you want to start a successful business. If it actually works, your entire daily life changes. Your relationships change because you're busier, you're stressed differently, you have new responsibilities. Your social circle might change. People might treat you differently, some with admiration, some with jealousy, some with new expectations. You can't hide behind the excuse of "I haven't had my big break yet" when things go wrong in your life. You have to step into visibility and all the vulnerability that comes with being seen. You have to handle actual responsibility and actual stakes instead of theoretical ones. Every single one of these changes represents a form of uncertainty, and uncertainty is what the fear response is designed to protect us from. And there's this other layer that's really crucial. Success means you have to confront your unworthiness issues head-on. When you're pursuing something and haven't achieved it yet, you can maintain this comfortable belief that you would be happy and fulfilled if only you had this thing. The lack of success explains everything that's wrong in your life. It's your universal excuse. But if you actually get the thing and you're still not happy, If you achieve the success and you still feel inadequate or empty or anxious, then you have to face the much more frightening truth that maybe the external achievement was never what you actually needed. Maybe the problem is something deeper inside you. Most people would rather keep pursuing the external goal forever than face that possibility. Let me tell you about something psychologists call the imposter syndrome, which is intimately connected to fear of success. You work hard, you achieve things, people start recognizing your competence, and instead of feeling proud, you feel like a fraud. You're convinced that you've somehow fooled everyone, that you don't actually deserve the success you're having, that at any moment people will realize you're not that smart or talented and the whole thing will come crashing down. This is fear of success in action. Your internal self-image hasn't caught up to your external achievements, and the gap between them creates this unbearable anxiety. And often the way people resolve this anxiety is by sabotaging their success to bring their external reality back in line with their internal identity. There's also the loyalty issue, and this is something people rarely talk about, but it's incredibly powerful. You might have grown up in a family or community where nobody was particularly successful. Maybe success was viewed with suspicion, maybe successful people were seen as sellouts or as having abandoned their roots. If you succeed, you're breaking an unspoken family code. You're separating yourself from your tribe. And we are tribal creatures to our core. The fear of being exiled from your group, even if it's just psychological exile, even if your group is kind of dysfunctional, is one of the most primal fears humans have. So you sabotage your success to stay connected to the people you came from. You stay small so they don't feel threatened by you, so you don't have to deal with their resentment or their distancing or their changed perception of you. And let's talk about visibility because this is huge. Failure allows you to stay relatively invisible. You're just another person trying to make it work, nothing special, nothing that draws attention. But success puts a spotlight on you. People watch you. People have opinions about you. You become a target for criticism, for jealousy, for projection. Everything you do is scrutinized more carefully. Your mistakes are more visible. Your flaws are more apparent. For someone who has anxiety about being judged or who has trauma around being seen, success represents a nightmare scenario. So they make sure they never get successful enough to attract that level of attention. They keep themselves just below the radar, just invisible enough to feel safe. There's this interesting paradox where fear of failure and fear of success can both be present in the same person at the same time, but they activate at different stages. When you're starting out, fear of failure dominates. That's the hurdle you have to get over just to begin. But if you manage to push through that and start actually succeeding, that's when fear of success kicks in. Suddenly you're dealing with a completely different set of anxieties. The thing that was supposed to feel good, achieving what you set out to achieve, instead feels destabilizing and threatening. And because you weren't expecting this response, because you didn't know fear of success was even a thing, you don't recognize what's happening. You just know you suddenly feel compelled to blow everything up. Here's a really specific way fear of success shows up that I think a lot of people will recognize. You have a dream, something you've wanted for years. And you tell yourself that once you have time, once circumstances are right, once the kids are older, once you have more money, whatever, then you'll pursue it. But somehow the right time never comes. There's always another reason to wait. And what's really happening is that keeping the dream in the future, keeping it theoretical, protects you from the terrifying possibility of actually trying for it and having to deal with what success would mean. As long as it's someday, you never have to face the reality of becoming the person who actually does that thing and all the changes that would require. The relationship between perfectionism and fear of success is fascinating too. Perfectionism doesn't look like fear on the surface. It looks like high standards, like caring about quality. But often what perfectionism is really doing is ensuring you never finish, never ship, never put yourself out there in a way that could lead to real success. Because if it's not perfect, you can't release it. And nothing is ever perfect. So you keep tweaking and revising and finding flaws, and the project never sees the light of day. You stay safe in the process stage forever, never having to deal with the consequences of completion and success. And we need to talk about what success would mean for your relationships, because this is often the deepest fear. If you become significantly more successful than your partner or your friends or your siblings, the relationship dynamics change. There might be resentment. There might be distance. People might not relate to you the same way. You might outgrow relationships that have been central to your identity. And there's this genuine grief in that possibility, this sense of loss that you'd be trading one thing you value, connection with these specific people, for another thing you value, achieving your goals. Your brain might decide that staying at the same level as the people you love is more important than pursuing success, and it'll engineer behaviors that keep you there. Here's another dimension of fear of success that's really important. Success often means facing your own power and agency, and that can be overwhelming. When you're stuck or struggling, you can blame circumstances or bad luck or other people. You're not responsible because you're not in control. But if you start succeeding, if your actions start producing real results, you have to confront the fact that you have more power than you thought. And power means responsibility. It means you can't play victim anymore. It means that if things go wrong, you have to own that. It means you have much less excuse for being unhappy or unfulfilled. Some part of you might prefer the powerless position because it's simpler and comes with fewer demands. Fear of success is also deeply connected to fear of your own potential. What if you're actually capable of really significant things? What if you could make a real impact? That's a heavy burden to carry. It means you have a responsibility to use your gifts, to contribute, to not waste your life playing small. It's much more comfortable to believe that you're limited, that you've already hit your ceiling, that this is just how it is. Then you can relax into mediocrity without guilt. But if you acknowledge your full potential, you can never truly rest in underachievement again. Every moment you're not pursuing your capabilities becomes a small betrayal of yourself. Let me give you a way to distinguish between these two fears in your own life. Ask yourself this: when you think about the thing you're not doing, does your mind immediately go to all the ways it could go wrong, how you could fail, how people would judge you for trying and not succeeding? That's fear of failure. But if your mind goes to what would happen if it worked too well, if you got more successful than you expected, if people actually cared, if it actually changed your life, and that thought makes you anxious? That's fear of success. And here's the thing, you might have both. But knowing which one is actually driving your behavior is crucial because they require different approaches to address. The way these fears show up in relationships is particularly revealing. Fear of failure in relationships looks like not asking people out, not being vulnerable, not admitting feelings because you're afraid of rejection. Fear of success in relationships looks like getting close to someone and then pulling away, sabotaging good relationships, finding fatal flaws in people who are actually good for you, or staying in bad relationships because they're safe in their badness. If you keep ending up alone despite wanting connection, it might not be that you're afraid of rejection, it might be that you're afraid of the intimacy and vulnerability that would come with a relationship actually working. And there's this whole dimension around deserving that ties into fear of success. Somewhere deep down, you might not believe you deserve good things. Maybe you internalized messages as a kid that you weren't special or smart or worthy. Maybe you made mistakes you've never forgiven yourself for. Maybe you grew up in an environment where nobody got to be successful and happy, so why should you be different? These beliefs create an internal ceiling on how much success and happiness you'll allow yourself to have. When you bump up against that ceiling, when you start exceeding what you unconsciously believe you deserve, alarm bells go off and you find ways to bring yourself back down to the level that feels appropriate for someone like you. The really cruel thing about fear of success is how invisible it is, even to yourself. Fear of failure is culturally recognized. People understand it. You can talk about it. But if you tell someone you're afraid of success, they often react like you're being ridiculous or humble bragging. So you don't even have language for what you're experiencing. You just know that every time things start going well, you mysteriously mess it up, and you hate yourself for it, which creates more shame, which makes it even harder to examine what's really happening underneath. Breaking through fear of success requires a totally different approach than breaking through fear of failure. With fear of failure, you need to build courage, to practice trying things and surviving the failure. But with fear of success, you need to expand your capacity to tolerate good things. You need to slowly increase your threshold for happiness, visibility, achievement, and change. You need to practice staying with success when it starts happening instead of immediately destroying it. You need to work on updating your identity to include the possibility that you could be someone who succeeds. You need to examine and challenge the beliefs that tell you success is dangerous or that you don't deserve it or that it would cost you things you can't afford to lose. And here's what might be the most important thing. You need to recognize that both failure and success are just experiences, just states you move through, not permanent definitions of who you are. The person who fails at something isn't a failure as an identity. The person who succeeds at something isn't fundamentally different than they were before, they're just in different circumstances. When you can hold both possibilities more lightly, when neither failure nor success has the power to define your entire worth and identity, that's when you can actually pursue things from a place of genuine freedom rather than from a place of managing your fears. So here's the real question to ask yourself. Not are you afraid of failure or afraid of success, but what would pursuing this thing cost you, and what would achieving it cost you? Because both have costs. Failure costs you the outcome you wanted. Success costs you the life you had before. And maybe, just maybe, you've been choosing failure not because you can't handle the sting of not succeeding, but because you can't handle the disruption, the change, the responsibility, the visibility, the altered relationships, and the loss of excuses that would come with succeeding. And if that's true, if you can name that honestly, then you can start making conscious choices about whether the costs of success are actually worth paying instead of unconsciously sabotaging yourself to avoid them. That's where the real power is. That's where you actually get to choose your life instead of letting your fears choose it for you.